There's several things I do to prepare a room to put up crown molding. The first one is I like to go around, pop a chalk line down from the ceiling, whatever the drop of the crown mold is. For this molding, it's going to be 4 3/8 inches. So we want to pop a chalk line 4 3/8 inches down from the ceiling. And the best way to do that, cut a block of wood that's 4 3/8 inches long, then just put it up in the corner and mark the bottom side of it. That way you don't ever have to use your tape measure. You just make a mark, and then we pop a chalk line. We'll just go across the wall there. One of the things that I learned early on is you want to make sure you use a blue chalk line to pop these lines, because red is a permanent color. It says so right on the bottle, and it can really tend to bleed out or get into the paint. It's possible that we may actually have to cheat the crown mold a little bit above or below this blue line. This is kind of our guideline though, but it's easier to paint over blue chalk. It's almost impossible to paint over red chalk. One of the other things that I've got to watch out for, since no framing job is absolutely perfect, there may be some little ups and downs. This gives me something to go by, but I may need to roll it up a little, roll the crown up a little higher, a little lower to get past a hump in the ceiling. This wall, I think, is going to be less than 16 feet, but sometimes you don't get 16-foot pieces of crown mold, so you have to make a splice. One of the things I've learned is don't make a really short splice because it can tend to get a kink in it. I always like to use at least a 3-foot, maybe a 4-foot piece to make a splice. Another thing that's important, when I come into this room, I want to be trying to decide if I have to splice, where do I want to splice it? To me, it makes the most sense. I want to hide the splice in this corner so that you can't see it from when you walk in the room. Also, I almost always work counterclockwise around the room when I'm installing crown mold, but I like to work to an outside corner, because if I cut a piece in an outside corner a little bit long, I can kind of zero in on the joint. So I'll start with pieces that don't have splices in them, because also a splice gives me a chance to kind of fine tune my lengths too. If I cut two pieces that are going to be spliced together, maybe 1/8 of an inch long or so, I can check and see how everything's going to fit and then shorten it down to get that perfect joint. Well, okay, nearly perfect joint. There's a couple different ways that I can make a splice on this wall. The way I like to do it is with a mitered joint like so, and I can put, that gives me some surface to put glue in. With that cut on a 45, I also have an opportunity to put some nails through there so I can glue and nail the joint. And even if the joint were to dry out and move a little bit, it doesn't open up quite as badly. Now, some people will just butt the joint, but if that joint moves at all, you know, you can just see straight through it. If I did want to butt the joint, I'd put some sort of a piece of wood behind it so there'd be some backing that I could nail and glue into. But I still think the best thing to do is do a mitered joint like this. I cut these on a 45, but it could be even as little as a 22.5-degree angle. Doesn't really matter as long as you remember what mitered angle you're using for both pieces. Pinning a joint together like this is one of those places that headless pinners really come in handy. I can put several headless pins through there to help keep the joint lined up and hold it in place while the glue dries without making a whole lot of big holes in the face of the trim. The last thing we do before we start cutting crown mold is make sure that we've got something to actually nail the crown mold to. In this room, the ceiling joists run this direction. Unless one of the ceiling joists just happens to be 3 or 4 inches off the wall, I'm not going to have anything to nail the top of the crown mold to. So what we do in that case is come in and get a piece of furring strip and nail it right in the corner, and so that when I put my crown mold here, I'm always going to have something that I can nail into. Now, it's a good idea to check and make sure what size blocking you can put in there, what size furring strip. A smaller crown mold would mean I need to put just a 3/4 inch furring strip in there. But we like to put an 1.5 inch one when the crown will allow that much room. Another thing that I always tell people, I like to use a 15 gauge or at least a 16 gauge 2.5-inch nail when I put up crown mold. So I want to make sure it's going to stay in place. Now, all the way across the bottom, I'm going to be able to hit studs. And when we turn and run the other direction, we're going to have ceiling joists to hit. I pretty much can tell where I need to be nailing here because the sheetrock's not been primed or painted yet. Although sometimes it's a good idea to, find the stud layout so you know exactly and mark it. Now, they sell stud finders that are electronic and will show you how to find studs, but we have a very foolproof method to do that in Arkansas. We use an Arkansas stud finder. This is an Arkansas stud finder. And all I've got to do, now I want to do this above the line so that it's not going to show up. But I'll just come in above the line and I'll just keep going until I hit a stud. It's foolproof. Now I can do the same thing on the other wall to find the ceiling joists. The trick to that is I don't want to be finding the ceiling joist out here in the middle. I need to get close enough to the wall where the crown mold's going to cover it, and then once I find one ceiling joist, I'll put a pencil mark that comes way out on the ceiling so that as we're nailing off the crown mold, I can find it. It wouldn't do me any good to have a pencil mark back here that I couldn't see. And sometimes we'll just go ahead and put this blocking all the way around the room. I don't know which one's faster, finding the ceiling joists or just going in and putting the blocking around the whole room. But the main thing is make sure you've got something good to nail to and that you know you're going to be hitting wood, because this molding is going to try and move, especially if you have forced air heat. Sometimes we find it just as easy to run the 2x2 all the way around the whole room. If we do that, we don't have to worry about locating the joists anywhere in the room. We just go ahead and nail the 2x2 all the way around the whole room. At that point, we're just going to be nailing through the top part of the crown into this blocking. But it is important to be nailing the bottom edge and the top edge of the crown around the whole room, whether you run a 2x2 around the whole room or whether you run the 2x2 where you can't hit a ceiling joist and then find the ceiling joists and nail into them when you're going across the ceiling joists.
Thanks for watching. If you enjoyed this material, don't forget to like and subscribe.